As many of you know, we started this symposium when I was NGA director in 2003, and then in 2004, the Geospatial Intelligence Foundation took it over. And it is really remarkable what USGIF has done and grow this into our nation's largest gathering of intelligence professionals, a terrific celebration of geospatial intelligence, and a great opportunity to share and grow the tradecraft and foster intelligence integration. Foundation has flourished with many very worthwhile programs, of which this symposium is just one. And one that I'm particularly gratified and proud of is the tremendous emphasis on our young people and bringing them along because they are, in fact, our future. So thanks to the foundation, and a huge thank you to all the corporate participants without whom these events wouldn't happen. Now, I've had the opportunity to speak at every GEOINT since we started, with the exception of 2006, which occurred right after I got canned as NGA director, probably not a coincidence. But I've spoken at GEOINT as the NGA director and as USDI, now as DNI, and I think this is my sixth time in this capacity. Now, next year, I do plan to be back, but I will be representing the GEOINT needs of the assisted living community. I just turned 75 last March, which means not only was I born on Pi Day, 314, but also I was actually around when Archimedes first calculated pi to its 6 digits. Now, this shouldn't come as a shock to anyone here. Robert maintains that I used to spot Socrates in the weight room, and I've always felt, by the way, that it's always very important to respect one's elders, but it's getting harder and harder for me to find any. Now, setting aside my time in ancient Greece, this spring I crossed another significant personal landmark. Was 55 years since I enlisted as a Marine Corps reservist. So Robert asked, thanks. Semper Fidelis for the Marines out there. So Robert asked that I fly down this year and to share some of what I've learned. Actually, he phrased that as, you've been around for 3/4 of a century. You had to have learned something, right? Yes, I said, one thing I have learned is that you're never too old to learn something stupid. So I told him, I've also learned that inside the DC Beltway, we don't always follow the ancient tribal wisdom that goes, when you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. And he said he'd heard that one more than once. He said at this point he's memorized my entire list of strategies the government tries that are less successful than dismounting from our dead horses. Somewhat sarcastically, he asked, is there any ancient wisdom that we did follow? So I had my staff do some research, and we found some proverbs that actually ring true to the deep truths of our existence as intelligence officers, especially inside the Beltway. So without further ado, and in no particular order, these are a few truisms from the geezer. So first, those who live in glass houses shouldn't leave their passwords on sticky notes. Every bird is charmed by the sound of his own voice. So when you're on the Hill, keep your opening statement to 5 minutes or less. A penny saved is a penny earned, and by God, we're willing to shut down the government to prove it. And speaking of God, my favorite ever since I was AFTAC commander, in God we trust, all others we monitor. It does no good to cry over spilled milk or sequestration. If everything is running smoothly, it's obviously time for reorganization. There is no I in stovepipes. Well, actually there is. Count on nothing of what you hear, half of what you see, and only 3/4 of your budget request. He who laughs last is most likely to hit reply all, to send an email telling everyone else to stop hitting reply all. No matter how high a bird flies, it still has to pass its poly. You can't squeeze blood from a turnip, but if the contracting officer says it's in scope, we'll try. Putting lipstick on a pig is an inherently governmental function. The early bird still gets stuck on Route 66. Of all the depressing words of tongue or pen, the most depressing, next slide please. A watched pot never boils, but everyone will be watching when you're in hot water. And speaking of hot water, 'tis better to remain silent and appear a fool than to say anything remotely interesting during congressional testimony. And one of my old favorites, of course, if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. Well, now it's, if you want a friend in Washington, don't bother. Since light travels faster than sound, many people in Washington appear bright until you hear them speak. And finally, idle hands are the devil's workshop, and so Sue Clapper is deeply concerned about what will happen in, yes, Tish, 248 days, but who's counting? So as I said, I was the NGA director back in 2003, which is the year we pushed through the name change from NEMA to NGA. And it was obvious to me that what we were doing was geospatial intelligence, not merely imaging and mapping. The GEOINT tradition of understanding the Earth, its natural and man-made features, gaining secrets, drawing inferences, and producing useful intelligence in a context that helps minimize uncertainty for our national decision makers. Well, that was built on the foundational work of the first NEMA employees in 1996, and for that matter, on the work of those who preceded them by DMA and INPIC. So as NGA gets ready to celebrate its 20th anniversary, which is hard to believe, on October 1st, I thought today it'd be worth taking a look back at the world of 1996. You know, when you get older, you have a tendency to, you can remember things way back then, I just can't remember anything about yesterday. It was a year, though, that of the O.J. Simpson trial. It was the year we caught the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, in his Montana cabin. It was the year of the Atlanta Olympics and the Centennial Olympic Park bombing, and the Khobar Towers attack in Saudi Arabia. In 1996, the Iraq disarmament crisis worsened, and in Northern Ireland, the IRA revoked the first ceasefire of the Troubles. It was the year that Scottish scientists cloned Dolly the sheep, and the year Nintendo released N64 system in the Super Mario 64 game. And it was the year that the chess world champion Garry Kasparov first faced off against IBM's supercomputer Deep Blue. So many events of 1996 seem to echo in 2016. Once again, terrorist attacks confront us and reach into the Western world. Science and technology breakthroughs fundamentally redefine our existence and make us in the IC rethink both our vulnerabilities and the opportunities in front of us. So I'd like to focus on the event at the end of my list, that is specifically the man versus machine chess match. IBM created Deep Blue to showcase the brute force power of supercomputing. The machine could very quickly evaluate millions of possible chess positions and make the next move with the cold precision of an algorithmic choice. IBM challenged Garry Kasparov to a classic match of 6 games. And in game 1 on February 10th, 1996, Deep Blue shocked the world by defeating the reigning world chess champ. That was the only game Deep Blue won in 1996. Kasparov took the overall match with 3 wins, 2 draws in the following 5 games. So the IBM team went back to work on computing power and algorithms. And in the 1997 rematch, Deep Blue won with 2 wins, 1 loss, 3 draws. Fast forward to this March. 20 years and just a few weeks after Deep Blue won its first game, we saw a wholly different computing demonstration with a Google-engineered machine and the Chinese board game Go. In 1996, Deep Blue was able to process all the possible chess moves to outmaneuver Kasparov. Go is different. There are 10 to the 90th power times as many possible positions in Go, as there are atoms in the universe. So a computer cannot win at Go by brute force. Instead, AlphaGo taught itself to play. And in the process, it developed what Google's engineers have called an intuition for the game. This March, Google's AlphaGo beat world champ Lee Sedol in 4 or 5 games. The biggest moment of the best-of-5 match was move 37 at game 2. The commentator, who was also a Go grandmaster, thought AlphaGo had made a huge blunder, placing its piece far away from the action. Lee Sedol took several minutes to try to understand the move, looking to capitalize on AlphaGo's mistake. Eventually, he recognized the brilliance and what he termed the beauty of the move, one that likely had never been played before and not something a human would think to do. Lee Sedol had to leave the room for 15 minutes simply to compose himself. So we've left behind the world in 1996, a world in which our smartest computers put their speed and brute force behind algorithms written by their human programmers. Now we live in a world in which machines can learn from their own mistakes and can develop a beautiful intuition. So what does this mean for us, lowly humans, particularly those of us in the intelligence community? And what can we do to adapt to the onrush of technology so that we aren't left behind? Those are particularly tough questions as we face and seek to understand a world of unpredictable instability that's become the standard, driven at least in part by climate change, in which mega population centers will compete for ever diminishing food and water resources. And governments will have an increasingly difficult time controlling their territories. In the next few years, as many as 2/3 of the nations around the world are at risk to one degree or another of instability, in what I'm seeing at least as a subtle erosion of the nation-state system. And we'll have little or no warning of where or when a regime change or government collapse might happen. So what do we in the IC, and particularly those in the GEOINT community who seek to understand the Earth, do? Well, first of all, I believe we'll keep doing what we're doing right. We'll continue to make integration of the 17 intelligence community components more natural and fluid. In fact, hopefully my successor won't have to talk about it. It'll just be the default. And GEOINT will continue to provide that foundation in which many other layers of knowledge will be overlaid. But continued IC integration isn't the panacea. We have to think past the integration efforts that are going on now. And one way we can do that is to think beyond the US intelligence community when we talk about integration. We'll have to make SCI clearances more ubiquitous at the state and local level, for example. So that intelligence sharing benefits first responders, and particularly the people on the front lines of the CT fight, which I think we will be in a perpetual state of. More access to intelligence will mean more SCI clearances outside what we now know as the IC. That will in turn means that we need, which is no news to you, a much more responsive, much more agile clearance system than we have today, both for initially granting them and for maintaining and updating them. This is yet another reason why continuous evaluation, which I think is the hope of the future, will be critical. And when it comes to our Commonwealth nations, it's my belief that we're going to just give up on the no foreign thing and extend dual citizenship privileges and responsibilities to our Five Eyes partners whenever we find each other in each other's intelligence footprint. And being inclusive with the Commonwealth nations will bring the next, if you think of it this way, the next concentric circle of allies even closer into what are now second-party relationships. So we'll need to expand integration, engage, and bring state, locals, and foreign partners closer. We'll need to stop fighting technology and instead put it to work for us. My national counterintelligence executive, Bill Ivanino, recently told me about a problem our security folks came across During a standard sweep of a new facility so that we could take possession, they discovered several wireless signals transmitting out into the world. Well, that was kind of bothersome. So they located the sources and were relieved to discover the signals were not from foreign intelligence bugs placed in the facility. They came from vending machines trying to tell their distributor that they were empty. Apparently, vending machines phoning home for refills is a fairly common problem, one we now know to look for and to mitigate. Well, that's just the tip of the famous Internet of Things we keep talking and hearing about, which has more than 10.3 billion endpoints, projected to grow to 29.5 billion by 2020, with a market of something like $1.7 trillion. So this leads to several questions about how the Internet of Things affects us, where are weak points that we aren't thinking about, and how is our workforce going to be affected even when our clothes are connected, or when doctors regularly prescribe wireless monitors for health conditions. Even now, I need a security waiver for my hearing aids, which have Bluetooth connectivity. And by the way, I don't do the Bluetooth thing. I get too much input already. So we need to move past just defending ourselves from drink machines and hearing aids, which, by the way, is why we're now in the throes of attempting to establish an IC-wide policy on wireless, which is very controversial, I might add. So we'll have some governance, and there's some consistency across the enterprise in how we propagate wireless capability, but that will also allow for technology to change, because inevitably it will. And we need to look at the opportunities that technology provides us too. In March, I met with the heads of intelligence from each of the Commonwealth nations, and we were in Canberra at the time, to talk about where we're headed. Dr. Paul Taloni gave us a fascinating talk on the state of technology and where it's going. I'd like to borrow a little bit from Paul's presentation. He is the director of Australia's Signals Intelligence Directorate, so he's their DERNSA equivalent. So Paul talked about sitting with his 7-year-old daughter and looking at the pictures of Pluto, taken a few months ago when the New Horizons spacecraft made its flyby. The first image he showed her, and later showed us, was the now iconic first color image NASA placed online, a rusty brown planet with the shape of a white heart covering its lower right quadrant. He asked his daughter what it was. She said, just a photo of Pluto. The successive shots were closer with more detailed views of the texture of the dwarf planet's surface. The picture on his third slide showed sharp ridge lines and peaks on Pluto's surface, casting shadows into a vast valley, with the nitrogen atmosphere hanging in layers heaped above the curve of the horizon. His daughter told him it was just the mountains on Pluto with the air. Then he showed her the best picture we'd had of Pluto from when he was 7. It was just a faint white dot among many white dots. And she said, "Wow, Dad, you're old." Now, I didn't bother to say anything at the time. When I was 7, it was just a few years after we discovered Pluto. His point was that in just one generation between Paul and his daughter, technology had leapt from seeing Pluto as a faint dot to visiting Pluto and sending back detailed color images. And by the way, with the recent announcement from NASA, we confirmed observations of 3,200 planets orbiting other stars, some that are 10 or 20,000 light years away. So we can look at that pace of technical innovation as a scary thing, something that could take away from the advantage the U.S. intelligence community has now, or see it as something that will utterly revolutionize our lives for the better. And something we in the intelligence community can, and I am confident will, take advantage of. Because we have gotten better at seeing what's out there. We've also improved our ability to look down and to better understand the planet we live on. That leads me to something Robert said yesterday that really struck me. He was explaining NGA's new strategy and defining some of the terms NGA and the IC are using to describe our new ways of doing business. Talked about object-based production, organized intelligence around what we're studying, a person, place, or thing, rather than around the collection system that gave us the data or image. He described a structured observation management framework capturing and storing data in a structured way, so that we rely on the technology to find and connect intelligence rather than on the memory of the analyst who entered it into the system. And finally, discussed using object-based production and structured observation management to build activity-based intelligence. The state in which instead of interpreting an image, we understand what's happening with the person, place, or thing that we're studying, and how that activity changes with time. Yesterday, in the midst of explaining these concepts, Robert said something that I thought was striking. He said, we'll move from imaging a small percentage of the Earth each day to sensing all of it. And when we reach that vision, and I believe we will soon, that will mark an amazing journey that NGA and the GEOINT community has made since at least 1996. And geospatial intelligence, which was a gleam really in the eye, will truly have transcended imaging and mapping. Far beyond anything we thought about, or at least that I thought about in 2003 when we simply changed the agency's name, which at the time we saw as a big deal. But it was just one milestone in the constant evolution of the intelligence community. It won't be easy, but achieving the vision Robert laid out is, I think, critical to the nation. Because despite all this technological change, there's one thing that hasn't changed in the 20 years NGA and NEMA have been around. In fact, it hasn't changed in my 55 years, including about 53 or so in the intel business. And I think it's something that won't change fundamentally in the future. And that's why, you know, the basic reason why we do intelligence in the first place. Now, the past few years, our nation has had a very public conversation about the intelligence community and what it does. And I think a lot of what has been lost in the public debate about how we conduct intelligence is why we even do it in the first place. Why does any nation state conduct intelligence? And we do mainly, I think, at its most basic level to reduce uncertainty for decision makers. That can be anyone from the president in the Oval Office to a private in an oval-shaped foxhole, if I can stretch the metaphor there. We certainly can't eliminate uncertainty for any of them, the president to the private, but we can certainly provide insight and analysis to help their understanding and to make uncertainty at least manageable, so that our national security decision makers can make educated decisions with an understanding of the risk involved. And so that we and our friends and allies operate on a shared understanding of the facts and the situation. So I believe that in this time of change, when we don't know who intelligence customer number one will be a year from now when we hold GEOINT 2017, what our national priorities will be and what challenges we'll face next, we keep the truth in front of us as why we do intelligence. Our unique accesses and insight will continue to help our national leaders manage the inevitable uncertainty for a long time to come. So thanks very much for having me. It's great to be back to this superb symposium. And thanks to the USGIF for the great work that it does, and to our industry partners who both support and participate in this substantively. So I'll stop there, and I guess, Tish, you're going to come up with some questions, right? Thank you very much.
Great. That was great.
All right? Okay.
Very. Do you want to move over into the center?
Well, I'm too far away. I want to see what you're doing.
He's got to know
There's no
everything.
answers on this thing, you know?
No, the answers are all up to you. And we have quite a few questions, and I know there are more still coming. So Jim, thank you. That was really terrific. Some new material there. Some really good jokes. So a great start.
Want me to tell some of the old ones?
To the morning. So you talked about, in your remarks, expanding the number of SCI clearances.
Yeah.
I mean, you've actually been trying to reduce the number. You talked about expanding for good reason. Can you elaborate on your vision of expanding to first responders?
Yeah.
First part, and then second part, without running into domestic use and intelligence oversight issues.
Yeah, well, first of all, what we've tried to do is reduce the requirement for clearances where it turns out there really wasn't, the access wasn't required. And the reason that's important, and we cut back maybe 600,000 or so clearance requests, mostly in DOD, which of course is the biggest elephant in the clearance living room, so to speak. And that removes a huge burden on the currently very stressed investigatory apparatus because of the demise of the principal investigatory contractor that was working for OPM, which really set us back. And believe me, we're aware of the backlogs and all that are concerned. So the point is not just reducing clearances, but reducing clearances where the access really isn't required and focusing on those cases where it is. And I believe, frankly, that there should be more access at the state and local level. No question that in doing that, that the same privacy and civil liberties considerations have to be considered. But in my engagements over the last 6 years or so, believe me, state and local officials, law enforcement, et cetera, have every bit as much sensitivity to that and every bit as much understanding as we claim. So that's, I think, really not a real concern. Obviously, we have to manage it. The problem, of course, is the system we have today is just not very flexible. And in engaging last night with the young people that were here, many of them are working for contractors, and it would be really good if we had the latitude to make it easy for them to migrate back and forth between contractors, the commercial world, and back to government and back again. And right now it's very hard to do that. I do think there is great hope with the continuous evaluation system. We have prototyped this, and I'm very, very enthused and optimistic about it as a functional tool that over time will relieve a lot of the frustrations and challenges we have with today's clearance system. This has been a real frustration of mine, something I've worked for 7 or 8 years when I was in the Pentagon as USDI and now in this capacity, and we just, for lots of reasons, have not made the progress that I had hoped. One thing I've learned, if you think coordination is a challenge within the IC, try it for the whole government. It's hard.
So as a follow-up there, do you see continuous evaluation being implemented during your tenure?
No, the requirement is by the end of, I think it's the end of next year, we have to be able to do 5% of the populations in each of the 5 security clearance tiers. Tier 5 being, of course, the TSSCI. So it will be a crawl, walk, run approach, and it certainly won't be fully implemented by the 20th of January 2017, but who's counting?
Okay. You also talked about getting rid of no foreign, which I'm sure was magic to a number of folks' ears down here, our Five Eyes partners. Can you talk a little bit about when eyesight will become Five Eyes, and what's
Well,
standing in the way of that?
First of all, I said no foreign in the Commonwealth. I was in March in New Zealand and in Australia, and since, it was kind of my farewell trip, although in
How many
Australia's
farewell
case, it was my
trips?
fourth farewell. But anyway, we had town halls at both places, and interestingly enough, I got questions, a question in New Zealand and a question in Australia, the town hall there, from, what's the future of the Five Eyes Alliance? And I do believe that, I don't know when, but I think at some point, it's just going to be much more easier for us, more convenient, just to do away with the no foreign thing for the Commonwealth and extend dual citizenship obligations and privileges whenever we're in each other's intelligence footprint. What I've seen over the last 50 years or so, that we've sort of chipped away at the no foreign restrictions, and I think that will continue. If any of you are familiar with what goes on at Denver, at the station there, which is a remarkable laboratory for integration within the U.S. and integration with the Commonwealth. Vince Stewart, director of the DIA, now has a deputy who's a Commonwealth flag officer, and other places in the community where we're contemplating inserting Commonwealth officers. So it's not going to happen by close of business next Friday, but I just think that'll happen. Eyesight, which is, I hope most of you have heard of, is the intelligence community IT enterprise, and the basic philosophy of which is a single architectural approach, as opposed to what I'll call charitably the confederation of stovepipes we have today. And this necessarily will have huge impact on the Commonwealth as well. They know that. They're gearing up for it. So eyesight will be the basis then, the IT basis for when the policy catches up to what I think is reality, and we change the rules. So it'll be, I think, a fairly smooth transition. And of course, as I mentioned in my remarks, there are another set of countries that I think will assume the closeness of the partnering that will sort of assume what we now know as a second party. When I was in the UK earlier this year in a sort of farewell thing there, and I got out to visit GCHQ, hadn't been there in 12 years, and when I was leaving, Robert Hannigan, who's a terrific director of GCHQ, presented me in a frame a replica of a memo that the then British CDI, the Chief of Defense Intelligence, signed. This was in February of 1942. And there was one line in this memo that really sticks out. And he simply said, all British intelligence will be shared with General Eisenhower and his staff. And this is when Eisenhower was just coming to the Mediterranean theater of operations, hadn't even come to the UK yet. One simple line, which I think we're probably going to come back to that line and abide by it.
Okay, I'm sure you're receiving many wonderful mementos on those farewell trips. So this is GEOINT. Let's talk a little bit about GEOINT. How do you suggest the GEOINT community implement the technology that allowed the machine learning for Go?
Well, I'm not, IT specialist on just how that's done. I do think, though, with the expanded robustness of what we now think of as GEOINT, which, in the day was simply the amalgam of, mapping, charting, geodesy on one hand, and imagery analysis on the other. So when you think about it now, that seemed like a big deal at the time when I was NEMA NGA director, and now that's kind of really old hat. And what strikes me about GEOINT today, which we use a lot in the White House to facilitate discussion, decision-making, and when I say the White House, specifically the Oval Office. And the richness of what can be done with the basic idea of GEOINT and taking advantage of all the IT capabilities, big data analytics, when you can portray not just the geography, but the activity that's going on in that geography and portray it graphically is a hugely powerful, compelling thing for intelligence.
So along those lines, can you talk a little bit about the nexus between GEOINT and cyber?
The what?
Between GEOINT and cyber, and how each of those two can be mutually supporting.
One of the challenges, of course, with cyber is it's hard to see, feel, and touch it. It's out there. And we've had tremendous challenges because of that, of such issues as how to generate cyber deterrence, which is a very hard problem. And it isn't like nuclear deterrence where you can, see ICBMs, you can see bombers, you can see SLBMs, you can sense them and all that, and you can't do that with cyber. So, where I think the nexus of cyber and GEOINT is in the depiction of cyber as though it were physical. And so when cyber can be graphically, again, this graphic portrayal, because it's another form of human activity, that is, to me, what can be a very compelling capability and intelligence. And in reference to my remarks about a way of reducing uncertainty for decision makers, because right now that is, I can tell you, is difficult to portray.
And I know NGA likes to say that they kind of put the bricks and mortar into the bits and bytes. So exactly what you're saying there, the location. You talked a little bit about, and it was quite a good example of the vending machine phoning home, having wireless in the workplace. And we've had a number of questions here from the millennials in the audience. What guidance, what sage advice do you have for them as they
first of all, this is frankly what I think is driving the IC leadership to want to embrace wireless. It has more to do with appealing to the millennials, because at least the studies we've done, there isn't a whole lot of, some will take issue with this, I'm sure, but at least as we've looked at it, there isn't really an incremental change or improvement in efficiency by virtue of wireless. So right now we have, everybody's kind of off doing pilots, if you will, across the IC, and the governing stipulations for managing these pilots is very inconsistent. So a couple months ago, we had XCOM, which is the leadership of the IC, and we kind of went through this issue. Everybody acknowledged that yeah, we need to have a policy, but what it's actually going to say, but that'll be this will be hard to work out. But I'm committed to getting some kind of governance for wireless in the IC, and getting something published certainly before I leave. And of course, as I indicated in my remarks, we do have concerns, security concerns, but at the same time want to create as appealing a work environment for these great young people. So that really is driving this more than alleged efficiencies.
Okay. Do you believe that the IC is taking as much advantage as they could be from commercial satellites for the foundational data and then using our NTM for truly the unique?
Well,
what else could be done?
The answer to that's kind of a when are you going to stop beating your wife question. No, we probably never take advantage of everything like we should. I mean, that's all a safe statement. It's my view that commercial and NTM have to be complementary. There has to be a partnership. There are certain unique, I think, government-only functions that must be performed by the NTM system. And at the same time, we can certainly depend on, use what's available commercially as a supplement for all kinds of reasons, for foundational purposes, as an enhancement for resiliency and reconstitution, all that. But we have to be, I think, very, maybe I'm conservative here, careful about just how much dependence we place on commercial when commercial concerns are in it for profit. And they're governed by boards of directors. We've had some cases where commercial companies will impose restrictions on the use of their data, like don't use it for kinetic targeting. And that's fine. That's certainly not inappropriate. But I do think we need to give some careful thought to just how much dependence we place on where we're riding on someone else's business model. At the same time, we don't want to, I don't believe it's appropriate to make companies completely dependent on the government for their business. They should be commercially viable, and if there are spin-offs, there are products of use to the government, that's great. So there's, in all these issues, there's a balance. And I suppose the short answer to the question, have we taken massive advantage of what's available commercially? No, probably not. We're the government, after all.
Striking a balance. Okay, D&I Clapper, what do you consider your greatest of many legacy?
I don't know. Well, it lasted a long time. Well, this is becoming a FAQ, frequently asked question. And I'll tell you, I think other people are going to have to grade my term paper. I think we're better as a community than we were certainly in the 9/11. I have a tendency to think in longer terms now. I think back what it was like when I first got in the intel business in 1963. And my war, of course, Southeast Asia, and I went to Vietnam early in 65 and 66. And automation and intelligence was acetate, grease pencil, and 2 corporals. And I distinctly remember in Vietnam when I was there, my dad coincidentally was there at the same time. He was the deputy chief of NSA in Vietnam. And CIA and NSA they were actually on 2 different planets. There was absolutely no connection or cooperation, at least that I could see from my vantage. Well, that's a lot different. Today we've been driven to integrate and to take more advantage of the capabilities that we have. And I see this in my 6 years of traveling overseas, time after time after time, where the sum is truly greater than the parts when all the capabilities of the community are brought together. That's a standard in the field, and it's becoming more and more of the standard in the Beltway.
I would certainly add to that, and you have, I mean, your number one initiative has been Intel integration. I personally would add to that list. If you look out into this audience, you have probably touched every person in this audience, whether it's through mentoring, through advice, through career counseling, through reorganizing, and finding folks. There are many opportunities. So I think that certainly will go down as one of your biggest achievements, Jim.
Well, thanks.
Thanks. So the flip side, what's going to be left undone on your list? What are some things? I mean, you know, you have ticked off a lot. You have worked through many hard initiatives. There's probably a few things on the list that you'll hand over to your successor.
Well, yeah, it's, and I actually, everyone in the administration now, starting with the president himself, is, I think we're all mindful of the fact that, you know, a lot of areas we haven't cured world hunger and won't. But what we can do is attempt to hand off whatever the issue is, hopefully better than we found it. And realistically, in today's world, that's about the best you can hope for. I'd like to think that when I walk out the door that the IC is a better performing organization than when I walked in. I mean, that's normally the way any of us think about anything we're doing. You know, have I made it better than when I started? So there are many things that will not be completely done. It's a rarity when you have, there's an air of finality about anything. Washington is a place where there's no such thing as a final decision. And so you just have to keep plugging away, make it better. It sounds like, you know, I'm lowering my threshold of satisfaction. I probably am. But it's, I think it's, you know, just being realistic. So, you know, eyesight will not be completely implemented. I think it'll be well enough along so that it'll be too hard to turn off, which is, you know, important measure. I wish we could have made more progress on clearance reform, but there's all kinds of reasons I won't bore you with while that wasn't possible. I think we've made a lot of headway in terms of analysis and our production. The fact that, unlike in my day that I referred to earlier, where intelligence was largely historical, it now drives everything. Drives everything on the battlefield, drives everything in the sit room. And that in itself, I think, is a great testament to the importance of intelligence, as imperfect, and it always is, as imperfect as it is.
Well, and I think it's a great testament to you also, Jim, that you have enabled that process to occur with this president. So last question, what advice do you give to your successor if in fact it's not you?
That ain't gonna be me. Hopefully the successor will look at what we've done and assess that before making any radical course changes. So I guess the advice, plea would be just, sit back for a while and watch how things operate, and then decide, where you want to put emphasis. I mean, obviously, change will happen. That's actually a healthy thing in our system. It's built on change and people changing. And I think that's what helps to vitalize our system. So I think the advice would be, look at what has been done, and then decide on what you want to work. There, obviously, eyesight would hope that the momentum there would be sustained. Got to get on clearance reform, and there's a laundry list of other things that will be in various stages of completion. And so I would just appeal for an assessment period before making any radical changes. I don't care who it is. It's a very tough position. It's tiresome, and not exactly stress-free. And I just hope people, whoever takes over, kind of thinks about that.
Well, and that's why we have been so fortunate as a country to have you as the Director of National Intelligence. And thank you so much, Jim, for your willingness to serve 55 years. And thanks for coming back again and gracing this stage.
Thank
well
you.
done.
Thanks. Thanks.